Today, the session will be of 1.5 hours long. The session will begin with Mr. Pradeep Mehta's welcome address. The panel discussion will consist two sessions. Session 1 is on Budget 2023 and employment, and Session 2 is on the future of work. After panel discussion, each session will have a question and answer discussion to make the session more interactive. We encourage members of our panel to keep their cameras on during the session. Also, please keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking. The session will be recorded and in a live stream on YouTube. It is encouraged that the audience member post their questions to the moderator, indicating the relevant speakers in the chat box and to make the session more interactive. Now I invite Mr. Pradeep Mehta, General Secretary, CUTS International, for his welcome address and to start the session. Over to you, sir.
Very happy to add to the welcome by Radhicka to all of you, and particularly to our distinguished panelists as well as this. Now, the purpose of this event was to look at the issues raised in the budget and as to how they can lead to better job creation. So, I hope we are all well tuned to it, which is session 1. And of course, the session 2 will get into larger issues. But having said that, in spite of what is happening globally, India is a distinct country with an economic transformation going on in a much better way than many countries. Now, we hope that what is happening now would lead to a better and a more sustainable work environment. That is the big challenge, which often is a missing link in this whole process, as we see. Just the other day, I was participating in this CII B20 task force on the future of jobs. And the same issue was raised there again, that people often tend to overlook the fact is that how do you look at worker welfare as an important ingredient of industrial transformation, rather than to look at it in isolation or as just as a cost factor. Now, what we are seeing now is the exponential growth in sectors such as digital, gig, green, and increasing automation, that the traditional job roles are changing. And are we prepared to deal with them at all or not? That is the other question which we hope will be addressed by this event as we go along. The changes in traditional job roles and outbreak of the pandemic have affected the unemployment rate of the country. As per the periodic labor force survey, Indian labor force participation increased from 37.5% of the population to 41.3% of the population in 2021-22. It is certainly a good news. Another feature is the employment structure is regressing as more and more people are shifting back to agriculture where productivity and wages are lower. This is a kind of a paradox that is being noticed. Also, the raise in women's participation in labor force is mainly through self-employment and not from jobs. There's no harm in that. Certainly, one of the aims of any economy, and particularly a project like us, is also to look at how we can create more job creators in order to absorb from the unemployed arena. Now, job creation and the need to skill, upskill, and reskill the workforce require attention by all the stakeholders, particularly in the government and industry. The Union Budget has outlined imperatives for growth and job creation, providing opportunities for youth and strengthening macroeconomic stability. The government focuses on high capital investments at 3.3% of the GDP on infrastructure. The financial measures of the budget indicates 75,000 crore rupees investment on 100 critical transport infrastructure implementation of schemes such as the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana 4 to skill the youth. It further emphasized on production-linked incentives for investments in sectors with high employment potential. The expansion of PLI schemes to new sectors which are labor-intensive, including toys, leather goods, renewable energy, is expected to generate employment for over 60 lakh in India. This is a reported fact. Therefore, the focus is not on direct job creation, but on investments that can create more jobs. I think we must understand the distinction here that unless we are able to garner and expand investments, we will not be able to create those. And then, of course, the care has to be taken is that it is not a jobless growth, but a job-full growth. We have organized this webinar with eminent industry experts and other stakeholders to discuss the Budget 2023 and its implications on jobs and deliberate on ways to advance quality employment. Let me underline the word quality employment. Our own, as most of you have been part of this Grow Jobs project since the last 3 years, and what we have seen in a lot of the primary work that we did, that employment has often been suboptimal in quality in many areas, particularly in the small and medium sector, which of course is much larger as a total of the industrial structure in our country. By the way, let me also share with you that this webinar is being live streamed on YouTube channel and will be released later, and it is being recorded as well, and will be released later on the YouTube channel of Cuts International. So what we see in terms of participation here is something which only allows us to have a more intensive discussion among ourselves and without being worried about audience participation. Let me conclude here by welcoming all the prominent panelists, including industry experts and professors. And I also noticed, and I must recognize Dilip Chenoy, former Secretary General of FICCI, and also formerly with the National Skill Development Corporation, who's joined us in the as in the audience. And we look forward to a very fruitful discussion, and particularly on the way forward with very concrete recommendations which we can tell the government that, look, this is what has to be done in order to create quality jobs. With that, let me thank you once again and hand over to Radhicka to take the event forward. Thank you very much. And I may also like to, I have another meeting to attend, so therefore I may like to take your leave with due respect. Of course, I'll be watching the recording at a later date and come back to you. But let me reiterate once again that at the end of the day of this event, we hope that we are able to get some very concrete, granular recommendations to be made to the government in terms of financing for quality jobs. Thank you. Radhicka, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for your thoughts. Now I invite our moderator, Mr. Sushil Muhnot, a senior advisor, Cuts International, who would introduce our panel and take this webinar forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Radhicka. And thanks to Mr. Mehta for giving us his opening remarks on the subject. And I would just like to add a little bit more, a brief introduction on the subject, when we already know that the labor force participation in India is quite low. And there is a need to enhance that. I think how are we going to do it? Again, is the question which we need to ponder on. Within that, on top of it, actually, you can say that the unemployment rate is also at 7.14% as per CMI data of January 23. And this unemployment is even higher in urban areas as also in certain states. There are certain states which are far outliers in terms of unemployment. So again, there is a need to focus on that. Then we also look at, as Mr. Mehta said, female unemployment rate is even higher. where we need to move. And not only that, every year there are 12 million new entrants coming over to the workforce. How are we going to plan to use them all? So this is a major issue for all of us to look at. So some of the questions which we would like to look at in this program, in this part will be, how does the Indian budget address this high unemployment, especially among the youth? So or the 20 to 29 age group also has a very high unemployment rates. We also would like to look at the role the center and the state can play in terms of addressing this issue, because each one has their own powers and own their programs. Then a lot of focus has been on skill development in this budget. So how far does it take us in terms of skilling, reskilling, upskilling of our labor force? And there's a huge emphasis on capital expenditure, especially for infrastructure. And this is likely in a way to lead to indirectly to job creation, but how far it will go on and what will be the impact? Maybe you would like to hear from all the panelists. So the first panelist that I would like to invite is Ms. Radhicka Kapoor. She is the Senior Visiting Fellow, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. She'll be able to give us an economist point of view overall onto the budget, that how this budget is going to take us forward in this direction. Over to you, Radhicka.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let me just start by saying one thing. I think, and Mr. Mehta already alluded to it in his comments. When we talk about the challenges in the labor market in India, I think asking the question of what we can do about unemployment, or unemployment particularly amongst the youth alone, is not enough, because we have a dual challenge of underemployment and unemployment. And of course, a high open unemployment rate is something that we have seen in the data only since 2017-18. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been distress in the labor market prior to that. I mean, there's been a huge crisis of underemployment, which has been festering for decades. And now that has been exacerbated because it also takes the shape of a high open unemployment rate. And to the question of what the budget can actually do to address this, I think, one, this is a challenge of such ginormous proportions. It is a challenge, like I said, which has been festering for so long in the Indian economy, that to expect that one or two budgets are going to change the course and address the problem, we really can't expect that. But having said that, if you look at what this budget or the budget prior to this was trying to do, is that essentially the macroeconomic strategy has been that we give an impetus to capital expenditure. And we've seen that huge increase happen in the capex as a share of GDP from about 1.8% in FY21 to 3.3% in this budget. And the idea has been that, look, the government spends on infrastructure, it creates jobs directly by doing that. And of course, in the process of spending on infrastructure, it also creates demand for goods which are used in creating that infrastructure. So it creates indirect jobs as well. And of course, in the longer term, it enhances the productive capacity of the economy, which in turn will accelerate private investment and jobs. And, on the face of it, that's a perfectly viable strategy from a macroeconomic perspective. But the question of whether it will create jobs or not really depends on what kind of capex expenditure is incurred and whether it will actually be able to create jobs in the immediate to the short term. Now, what we know from the allocations in the budget is that a large part of this infrastructure is going to be spent on things like railways, things which are very capital intensive in nature. A lot of these investments have a long gestation period. They are not going to bear fruit in the immediate short term. We know that infrastructure projects take very long to get clearances in India. So in the sense of how much of this money is going to be spent immediately on, which are the shovel-ready projects, is there actually enough absorptive capacity in the system to spend this money in the coming financial year so that it can actually give a boost to investment and job creation is not clear. The second is that, given that a lot of the investment that the central government undertakes is very capital intensive in nature, the role role of the state government also becomes important. Now, of course, in this budget, the government has also increased allocation for states to spend on capex. But here again, the question is that, whether it is going to fructify, and do they have shovel-ready projects to do this? Also, what is it that they're spending money on? Because very often, it's smaller projects, local projects, which can generate returns more quickly. Like, for example, building a road in a village which connects it to markets. It can enhance the productive capacity of the local economy. It can help the smaller micro and small units access markets more quickly. So more focus on local projects and projects which are more labor intensive in nature. Those are the ones which are likely to create jobs. So therefore, the question of whether this strategy will actually create jobs or not is going to depend a lot on the nature of projects which are undertaken and how much the states will be able to spend relative to the center is quite crucial to this discussion. And the other question, of course, is that, the idea behind the strategy is that eventually the government is spending on infrastructure because it wants to crowd in private investment. And the question that we need to ask is that, will that really crowd in private investment? Because we've seen year after year, a lot of incentives have been given to the private sector. There's been the lowering of corporate tax rates. There have been many changes which on the face of it have improved India's ranking on the now disbanded Ease of Doing Business Index. There have been labor regulations which have been reformed, and I use the word reform very carefully here, to sort of make the environment more friendly for private investors to invest. And despite that, we actually haven't seen a huge increase in private investment. So the question of whether this, because eventually what we will need is for the private sector to come in and create those jobs. But whether this strategy will actually crowd in that private investment is unclear. And part of the reason it might not happen, and this is something which perhaps, the budget could have talked about, or generally, the macroeconomic strategy needs to focus more on, is the demand side of the economy. Because the part of the reason why the private sector is not investing, of course, there are supply side factors, but there is also a huge problem of demand in the Indian economy. And how do we actually get that domestic demand going? Because we know that, we don't think that we haven't done very well on exports. We've never been an export-led economy. Also, the WTO predicts that global trade is not expected to accelerate this year. So it's not as if it's an increasing pie that we can try and grab a share of that. So where is the demand overall for industry to come from? So unless there's going to be a boost to domestic demand, it doesn't seem like the private sector would really come forth and invest immediately and create the kind of jobs that we need for the Indian economy. So I think the policy focus has to move towards more demand side measures and look beyond the supply side issues. And here, let me just talk a little bit about the PLI scheme, which thankfully did not get any additional allocation in the budget because it's still a very new scheme and we haven't seen it bear fruit yet. So given that we've already allocated a huge sum of money amounting to about 1% of GDP to it, we should be more careful in terms of looking at how it fares before spending more money on it. But the even with the PLI, the worry again, like, Mr. Mehta already talked about, is one is that it is being spent on a lot of capital intensive sectors. So unless there is a radical rethink there in terms of what sectors we want to focus on, is it going to be more labor intensive sectors? It's unlikely to create jobs. In fact, there was a document which was released recently or was presented by the CEA in a meeting where they actually showed that even in the electronics and mobile industry, they had managed to achieve just about 20%, I think, of the job targets that they had for that particular sector. So, we haven't performed very well there. And one worries about what the legacy of a scheme like this will be, because to my mind, the idea of industrial policy and PLI, strictly falls into the ambit of industrial policy because we are giving incentives and trying to shift the growth of the economy towards certain sectors. The way the scheme is designed, it's not clear whether it will actually enhance the productivity and the capability of firms. Because if you go back to the literature and industrial policy, we've always been inspired by what's happened in East Asia. If you look at what happened in Korea and the work of Alice Amston there, she talks about how basically the incentives or the subsidies which were given to the firms were linked explicitly to them enhancing their productivity and competitiveness. And this was done by virtue of linking their incentives and subsidies to their performance in the export market. Because eventually to perform in the export market, you have to become more competitive and productive. Now, how the PLI is actually enhancing the productiveness and the competitiveness of firms of Indian firms, that's not very apparent. I mean, we are giving subsidies and trying to lure firms to set shop here. Some of them are creating jobs, but not commensurate to the kind of investment that we're undertaking. So I would be a little cautious about, I would be cautiously optimistic about what can come out of the PLI in terms of job creation. And finally, let me just talk about MSMEs, because that's one area that the budget did focus on, and the finance minister spoke about at great length. There was an infusion of an extra 9,000 crores in the corpus of the credit guarantee fund, which is likely to make collateral-free loans available. It's likely to reduce the cost of credit. There were certain steps which were taken to reduce the delays in payments, and import duties, thankfully, were also not increased for a lot of goods that the MSMEs are using to increase the burden on them. But having said that, again, what the literature tells us and what I've seen in some of my own recent research on MSMEs is that a lot of the MSMEs that actually create jobs are the new MSMEs, the younger MSMEs. Now, we are seeing very little in the policy discourse in terms of what we are trying to do to bring in new industries, to bring in new firms and accelerate entrepreneurship. We are seeing it in the tech sector, but in the non-tech MSME sector, we're not seeing very much to accelerate entrepreneurship. And globally, actually, not just in India, but globally, the literature tells us there's actually these new young firms, which are engines of job creation. The old firms on net don't create so many new jobs because they create and then they also destroy. So net job creation is not so much, but it's the new ones. So the question of what we can do to accelerate entrepreneurship in non-tech sectors also needs to be thought through, because again, I presume this is something we'll discuss in the second section, that where in the tech sector again creates jobs only for the very high skilled. And those are a very small proportion of our labor force. Vast majority of the labor force is low skilled and unskilled. And for a lot of these people, it's either going to be construction or labor intensive activities, which will provide the kind of jobs that they need. So therefore, that focus on non-tech entrepreneurship, getting new firms in the non-tech sector is also important. And I don't know how much time I have, but maybe I'll just, comment on this question of women, because it's been spoken about a lot. And the question, the data, the PLFS data is telling us that there has been an increase in female labor force participation rate, and that's a pretty substantial increase of about 8 to 9 percentage points from before the pandemic. And I think we have to be very cautious in interpreting these statistics, because a lot of this increase in the female labor force participation rate is in fact distress driven because of the effect of the pandemic. Women have been pushed to go back into the workforce to do work which is precarious, because vast majority of this increase is happening because women are working as unpaid family helpers. So they're going back and working on their farms. There's a sharp increase in employment in the agricultural sector, which is contrary to the structural transformation one would expect for an economy like India. And of course, I mean, a lot of this is pandemic driven. The reversal in India's structural transformation is largely pandemic driven. But of course, we still haven't been able to correct it. And we need to think more carefully about how we correct it, and particularly give a boost to labor intensive manufacturing, because even for women, it's not as if it's simply supply side factors. It's not that it's simply restrictive norms, it's safety issues, it's cultural factors, the burden of unpaid care work, but it's also the demand side factors, the fact they don't actually find the kind of jobs which they want. The sectors where they would work are not performing very well. So let me conclude by saying that from a policy perspective, it's important that we also ambit the discussion on all of these subjects to look at demand side issues and not just supply side issues. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Radhicka, for giving us this detailed exposition on it, wherein you are covering the challenges, especially for the macroeconomic strategy and how it can translate into the short-term employment. How this capex, which is going to be there, how is going to be converted into an employment in the immediate future versus the little longer to medium term on it. So that is another one. And your comments on the, especially on the PLI scheme also, okay, that yes, how will it help? Will it be able to help? And you have given us examples of other countries. Yes, MSME sector, we have tried to grow the MSME sector by providing them CGTMSE the benefit 9,000 crores. But yes, how do we bring in the new ones, which will be there, which is very important. And I think which is an important area, especially the non-tech area, as you have pointed out. And on the women's side, yes, they are forced to go to work, or they have been, and not kind of jobs which they are getting. I think these are the important issues which you have focused on. But we also have had that the CMI MD, Mr. Vyas, saying that the investment ratio is inadequate to create jobs, with net fixed asset growth is being only 3% YOY. So again, there are issues in terms of the private sector participation coming into it, I think. So we will discuss it more as we go along. And I'll now request our next speaker, Mr. Ajay Shankar. He's the chairman of TEMA Council on Industrial Policy. So he will be able to give us a much more idea on how where we need to create the jobs, especially the jobs in the manufacturing sector have been coming down and people are moving to nutrition, towards agriculture, and the MSME sector, whether how it can create even more jobs, especially in the non-tech sector. So I'm sure he will give us a much more stronger view on, specialist view on the subject. Mr. Ajay Shankar, please. I think there is some issue with Mr.
Am I audible now? Yeah.
Oh, yes, you are audible, sir.
Thank you. I think all of us are agreed that job creation is really the foremost challenge, if I may say so, for the country today. And in this session, I will focus on the budget itself. And I think in the next session, probably talk of some, broader issues. But I would like to make one major point, and which is there is high time the whole development strategy shifted to job creation rather than pursuing GDP growth numbers. And we should look at everything through the prism of job creation and quality job creation. Now, I'll come straight away to the budget, because I can sort of say many more things on that. So if we look at the budget, where do we see signals or signs that there could be a positive impact on job creation? Now, a point which is generally being made is that capex is rising, public investment is rising, and that would generate jobs. At a very fundamental level, that's right. And to the extent the investment of public money goes into infrastructure creation, which in turn is in the construction side, then construction in India is still pretty labor intensive. So we certainly get a very positive effect in terms of job creation. But if you look at the whole budget, it still is constrained by the requirement of fiscal responsibility and not allowing the fiscal deficit to rise. So it would be a bit difficult to make the case that the budget as a whole is providing a fiscal stimulus for job creation. But to the extent that it leads to growth in construction, there is job creation. So where are the other indicators or pointers where the budget could, in implementation, trigger job growth? So one is an area which is mentioned explicitly in the budget, and I'll take that the first, which is tourism. Now, tourism is highly labor intensive. It is labor intensive across the world. And we have not yet succeeded in making tourism within the country attractive enough. So we really don't get large numbers of tourists from overseas. We get NRIs who want to come and catch up with their relatives and families, or the children want to be shown what India is all about. But the situation is so adverse that even wealthy Indians prefer to go out of the country rather than travel within the country. So I hope the reference by the finance minister to tourism leads to action, which then can result in a qualitative transformation of 3, 4, 5 years. Because in terms of what India has to offer, we are very rich in terms of endowments, in terms of tourism potential. But what we've been able to achieve is very limited, and that too in very limited areas. So a couple of states have done a great job, but at a national level, we haven't succeeded. So 2, 3 specific thoughts I have on this. One is that I think government needs to adopt what I would call an oasis development approach. So this is my tourist spot. This is the nearest airport. And I invest enough public money to make sure that the experience of the tourist from the airport to the tourist destination is good enough. And he wants to come back or recommends it to his friends to come back. So obviously the basics is the road should be good. There'll be no malba on the road. The place you go to, you don't have air pollution. You run it only through EVs. You cordon off some areas. You train the guides and shopkeepers a little better. Avoid unpleasantness of beggars knocking on your car window and wanting money, and so on and so forth. So a whole lot of little things which can create the right ambience for a tourist. And the other is a tourist location. We need to create bed capacities which are large enough to make it attractive for tourist operators in the world. Now, most attractive tourist destinations in India do not have it. So if I'm a large operator and I want to bring huge numbers, then unless those beds are created at the tourist spot and in that islanded place where I can stay, I can shop, I can eat, I can visit the tourist sites, and then come home, we will not achieve a breakthrough. Now, one problem in creating these, number of beds has been is a chicken and egg story. As a private investor, why should I go and build 500 rooms near Hampi? Because nobody's coming there. Hampi is one of the finest sites in the world. And because these rooms are not there, nobody comes. Now, the state has a major role in making this happen. And I would like to draw attention to what the state did in the pre-reform days, in terms of pre-PPP days. The 2 Taj hotels of Delhi, the cost on land and the basic building was incurred by DDA and NDMC. The Taj came in only to finish the building and run it, and the contract was lease rent, which was minimal, covered the capital cost, and revenue share. Now, this model has worked well and it has been tried in other sectors. So if we say pick up Hampi and we want to get, say, 1 million tourists there, then we need to go with the big bang of critical mass of investment, with the government absorbing the risk till it takes off. And the sovereign alone is capable of absorbing that risk. Once we do that, so then the Oberois and the ITCs or anybody else will come in large numbers. Until you have large numbers and all the facilities, and facilities beyond the monuments. Because one mistake we made, I think, in tourism is that the monuments are protected by ICRIER. You go and see the monument, and then there is nothing else to do. And when you go inside the monument, we haven't created very attractive, very intelligent guides to make it interesting enough. Nor have we created tapes which you can plug in and get a guided tour. This is, point number X, and this is the history. This is interesting. So tourism is, in my view, a sunrise sector, and a sector which is highly labor intensive and is there for the long run. And so I'm glad the finance minister has mentioned it, but I think there's a tall task ahead in thinking through what will make it succeed and how to make it succeed in the least way. And as I said, in a new greenfield site where private sector is not willing to invest in large numbers, we do the Taj NDMs, Mansingh and Taj Palace model, and where private sector is willing to come and find. And one other mistake which we have been making all across the country is that we have considered hotels very attractive as a commercial proposition, and so we auction lands. The moment you auction lands, you get returns only if you are 5-star, 7-star. Well, if you want volumes, you need the more basic kind of hotels, and if you want the attractive destinations to get large number of those hotels, you must give the land at reasonable rates. So near Delhi airport, that hub that has come up with a number of hotels is the way forward. That's what we see in the rest of the world. Now let me move to another area where the budget has positive signals, and that is green growth. And there is a lot of money that is committed for green growth. There are funds that will be created. You know, the shortfall in lending will come into funds, etc. Now, green growth properly implemented can also be made very labor intensive. But in the implementation of green growth, there needs to be, need to look it through the lens of job creation, in addition to becoming green. So to just give you one distortion that has occurred already, we have been very successful in the National Solar Mission, and we are going at a great speed on solarization of the economy. But our growth has a distortion that we have succeeded with large projects and big contracts. Now, for a few years, the FM has been saying that we need to get solar panels into our villages in decentralized generation, but we haven't succeeded on the scale that we need to. Now, if we say that in one village, you can create 1 megawatt of solar park capacity through kilowatt range of solar panels on the roofs over cattle sheds or on fallow land or over the village ponds, and you get 1 megawatt in one village, then 6 lakh villages, we are looking at 6 lakh megawatts. And all this will be labor intensive, it will be dispersed, and all kinds of people will get jobs and farmers will get more income, which they will generate other jobs. Similarly, if you look at green growth from the prism of the use of bio-waste, now every household is getting the gas cylinder and the gas stove and is switching over and will switch over in the next few years to modern clean cooking. So the cow dung that is not being burned and converted into cow dung cakes can be used to get modern green energy. So you can, put it through a micro gasifier and generate electricity. You can put it through a micro thing and generate gas, which can be blended or used to run tractors or whatever. And you can also use it with new technology to make green hydrogen. And that green hydrogen may actually be cheaper than the green hydrogen from electrolysis to electrolyzers. And you can do it in 6 lakh villages. But you need to roll out the map, you need to learn how to make it happen. And here again, it has to be the business case for private enterprise at a village level. So till that business case is sound, we won't get investment and we won't sustain it. And that needs creative thinking and creative implementation. And again, we have a very good role model in terms of the green revolution. The price signal has worked very well if you have an MSP which gives everybody in the supply chain returns on NDDB, the Amul model. So if you are able to create the right procurement price with credibility and where everybody gets returns or get jobs, then you get the huge benefits. In the private sector has done with paper plantations for the paper industry, or wood plantation for the paper industry. So in implementation of green growth, if enough thinking goes into how to get also job creation in addition to the other thing of decarbonization of economy or peaking of CO2 reductions and so on and so forth. And again, we can extend the same approach to get MSMEs to go green and consume only green electricity. Now, large firms see brand value addition by claiming they are carbon positive or water positive, the 100% solar, and they get claim credit all over the world, and rightfully so. But the MSMEs will not be able to do that without government coming in. Now, the same credit guarantee mechanism which was there for, the COVID distress, the same credit guarantee mechanism can be extended, and then aggregators can be brought in like ESL, or so many new ones can be created, which will say, these are 100 clusters. In the next 2 years, they will be consuming only solar power. Or these are the 100 clusters where we will get them to replace their inefficient pumps, motors, or whatever, boilers, and they will become energy efficient. Now, that has also what I would call the multiplier effect, because if you're replacing boilers, pumps, transformers, then you're creating demand for that domestic industry, because none of it is going to get imported. So if you create that kind of demand with the credit guarantee scheme and aggregators coming into play, then you get a multiplier effect in demand creation and job creation. But that's a kind of thinking which needs to begin, and it's not yet mainstream, let me put it mildly. And similarly, if we go on, as was mentioned by an earlier panelist, that in investment, we can also look at where you create more jobs. So we get decentralized investment. So for instance, on the agriculture side, we clearly need the cold chain. We don't have it. It's decentralized investment. Again, a credit guarantee scheme and risk mitigation would give us the entire, cold chain, storage, godowns, etc., that we need. But without state intervention in risk mitigation, then again, it's a chicken and egg story. Why should I invest in the cold chain or those, chilled trucks or carriers or the godowns? Because I don't know who will come there. So right now, the economy is stuck with, cold storage of potatoes and nothing beyond that. And everything else comes in open trucks and goes in open trucks and sold or rots or whatever. So we need that kind of thinking to then get the momentum in job creation, and you can do it across the country. Now, how much more time do I have in this session? I think I should have exhausted it by now.
Yeah, maybe another 2-3 minutes. We could take it up.
So I'll just sum up that the budget has a few good pointers or provisions and announcements which create the space for a lot of job creation, though the focus is not on job creation. But if in implementation the focus shifts to job creation and we start seeing results, then in subsequent budgets we can get a lot, many more initiatives with many more results. One comment on the PLI. Now, the PLI is the first instrument of industrial policy that India is using after a long gap. Now, India in industrial policy would and should do both things. Succeed in sunrise sector, succeed in high technology sectors, we have the hydrogen mission and so on and so forth. But we also need to create jobs. So we need to see where with PLI I succeed in high technology and become globally competitive without creating jobs, and where I succeed in creating jobs and how do I design that PLI. Now, sometimes you get unintended benefits. So for instance, Apple's success. And Apple's success is phenomenal, and it partly due to PLI is well designed. But if Apple succeeds in bringing in its entire supply chain, which they're attempting to do, then the job creation would be phenomenal, because the fact is that electronics hardware today is still highly labor intensive. So we can also see in PLI where we have, globally, the industrial supply chain is labor intensive. We are not there. How do we create it? I will end by just giving two examples. One is shipbuilding. It remains labor intensive, remain labor intensive for years. We see no attempt at creating a shipbuilding industry in India. Not even the first steps. It's not even a discussion. Similarly, we create an aircraft industry. It will remain labor intensive for a long time. Reasonably, not. And then we come to garments. We are still stuck in a plateau where we only export cotton garments. We are unable to make garments for the global supply industry using man-made fibers. The problem is it can easily be fixed. I mean, there are ideas on the table, one can discuss it on another occasion. So government has to think of all policy instruments which can be tweaked to create jobs. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Ajay Shankar, for giving us this wonderful insight and telling us that the most important job which the budget can do is to focus the entire strategy on job creation. I think that is where we need to bring in. Yes, CAPEX is giving, and Mr. Joshi, from the CRISL has been also saying that construction, tourism, they are the ones, and infrastructure are the ones which can create plenty of jobs, which you have said also, and you have given us more details on that, whether construction happening or not.
And may I take just another 30 seconds? On the construction side, on the housing side, this country is stuck at a very low equilibrium plateau. It is stuck there because land prices are far too high. And so we have a real estate or land price, asset price bubble, which is very stable. And the prices bear no correlation to economic returns. And therefore, only public policy can give you land at rates which will give you mass housing through market forces. Otherwise, government can always build houses on public lands. But if the market is to create the housing stock which the country needs, then public policy should address the real land price asset bubble that we have and allow land to be developed in a way that the economic needs are met and houses are built and construction, which can generate jobs. And it's a disgrace to see people sleeping on the roads. It can easily end.
Yeah, that's right.
It can easily end in 5 years.
Yeah. So we also have seen from yours that the government needs to put a lot of money on the tourism side to make it viable in the first place, so that the private sector investments can come in. And your OSS development strategy also looks pretty good in terms of focusing our efforts in that sector. And another important area which you have covered is the green growth. I think there is so much importance on the green growth, where we need to be more decentralized. And right from the beginning, when we are starting a sector, let us go on the labor intensive way. And as you said, bio-waste, see, government has already come out with a program on compressed biogas that will be utilized for CNG purposes, for mixing 5 to 10% within the CNG also, just like ethanol has been done. So I think there is going to be a lot of promotion for the compressed biogas sector also. And MSMEs to go green, yes, there is a lot of support required by them. Without that, they will not be able to actually go into that. But yes, it can create a lot of domestic demand. As Radhicka also said, that we need to create domestic demand. And this is where I think we need to actually work on in terms of getting in. Yes, your comments on the PLI, I think we need to refocus on the PLI in terms of purely getting us into those sectors which are labor intensive, which can help us. Just something again, like Radhicka also said, that yes, the non-tech sector in the MSME sector is also going to be an important one for job creation. I think that's where I think we need to work on. And land prices, of course, the most important thing where we can build up something. Thank you very much. And now we will go to Mr. Virjesh Upadhyay, Director General, Dattopant Thengadi Foundation. So he will give us his views on an overall basis here, how we can tackle this important issue which is facing all of us. Over to you, sir, Mr. Virjesh.
Thank you, Sushil ji, Radhicka ji, and very good to see Ritu ji is also here. All esteemed panelists. I think we need to understand this issue in two contexts. One is employment, other is employability. I am very much associated with the concern with the area, with the job, and my experiences. When I am meeting industries, they say, sir, we are not finding people appropriate for this particular job. Means there is a huge gap. Industries are not finding skilled or qualified workforce. And the other is when you go to the society, workmen, they are in search of jobs. So these two aspects need to be have into consideration. So when I go ahead and see the budget, this year's budget, if you see, one Saptarishi model, Finance Minister has assigned inclusive development, reaching the last mile, infrastructure and investment, unleashing the potential, green growth, youth power, financial sector. And when we go into detail of this, the more and major thrust is on skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and another area is being pushed further, RPL, recognition of prior learning. So this budget is having more and making one employable, meeting the needs of world over requirement. I'm looking now and I'm finding a lot of articles coming from Europe is looking towards India. Many other countries are looking towards India, finding for in search of workforce of that quality, that is skill. And considering this, I think budget has a lot thrust on making India's workforce of that standards, means artificial intelligence, industry 4.0 requirements, 3D printing, means whatever comes into in this latest changes, whatever coming in the world of work and the technology, government has allocated a huge budget to make India's workforce tune with this artificial intelligence, and government has planned to set up artificial intelligence center at different locations. So when I analyze the budget, one more thrust is making country's workforce employable. The next, when we further analyze the budget, it is huge allocation for infrastructure development. And we know, we can understand from the history when infrastructure development only government will do, should do and can do. Private enterprises, they hardly comes for the infrastructure development. So it is another big initiative of the government to develop the infrastructure, which creates ease for opening the business, developing the business. And once business are developed, they of course create lot of opportunity for the workmanship, for the employment. So huge thrust is on infrastructure development, huge budget allocation is, and rightly as Radhicka ji has mentioned, states also has been given a role to how to see this is expenditure. Why I am coming? Central government alone can't address this issue. The entire ecosystem, it's a central government, it's a state government, it's a private enterprises, they all are equally responsible. I used to address the ecosystem to provide employment. Nowhere in the world, never in the history, government alone has provided employment. And unfortunately, in India, employment issue means it is connected with the wage employment. Because of historical reason, wage employment has been the preferred one. However, considering the India's situation, as I referred to, by nowhere in the world and never in the history, government has provided job employment to each and every. Then what is the way out? The way out is widening and strengthening the social security net for self-employment, for employment in the private sector, and the very new type of workforce emerging, this gig and rest, means we have to see the changes in the world of work even. If we are not considering the coming days are going to be more on gig or self or own, like that of way. And for that, a strong and sustainable social security net is more required. So I think if we see and analyze the budget, budget has a great focus on creating this kitty. And again, social security, it cannot be the responsibility or duty or obligation of government alone. Because I have seen we are now working on nowhere in the world the corpus of social security is sustainable. They all are trying to find the means to address this one. And until unless we are of the view, until unless society is given a role in strengthening our contribution in the social security corpus kitty, social security may not be sustainable anywhere in this. So this is the third area, means government alone or state government alone or only the this wage structure employment. If you consider India's today's position, and hypothetically I'm asking if it is a make just a double, again there will be lot of gap for asking, seeking employment, and we are providing. And making capacity double, it is not going to. Then the only area is shelf, startup, entrepreneurship, rest means. So these are the options. And for that, I think budget has a very wide focus and budgetary allocation on this. And as rightly my previous panelist has referred, okay, this budget are the entire discussion in and around after COVID. We have got a lot of learning after COVID. And that has created a very different world to think and design. We don't have policies to address that. A lot of things are there, and gradually policy makers are trying to reach, society is also trying to reach. So we need to address the practical aspects of the field. So social security one, making employable another, and the third one is the wherever government can make. So government is also trying that. The next and very important area, which are the area as Ajay Shankarji was referring, this tourist sector. One very potential sector is emerging, care sector. And especially our Ayurveda, demand for care worker and our care sector. Purposely, just to know, I tried to visit some of the major Ayurveda centers in the country. And I am happy to share with you, I could get a number of foreign patients there. They were taking treatment, and many of them, they responded, sir, it is a traditionally of Indian, this one, so India can, and means I find a lot of scope. And if we see the government intent, design, budgetary allocation, a huge attention is paid to develop the care center and care worker. So I think the design of budget this time to create infrastructure, to strengthen the social security net of the country, and make workers employable to meet the need of emerging technological challenges, whatever coming for future. So budget has a huge focus, and I'm hopeful if this thrust continue, and again with reference to government alone can't. So the scope is, as PLI we are discussing, a lot is design, means PP model, so many things. So I think rest we will be discussing in the next one. But for this content, I find that budget has a huge dimension, direction to create the employment, make one employable, create the opportunities for the sector like care, tourism, and different, and where private enterprises and others can be invited and create. So with this, I think the budget aspect, what I could understand, it has a dimension more with this focus, and I'm hopeful in coming days, to some extent, this will go again and continuation is the most important and required concern which I use to focus, because I find at one point of time there is more thrust and very next day it all goes back to burner. So that should not. With these words, thanks to all you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virjesh, for focusing on basically the employability. The employment question is one part, the other part is the employability, which is there, which is so very important issue. And for that purpose, what you have said is the government alone cannot do, and that there need to be all other participants also to come in. And for that, the most important, one of the very important thing I think which we need to focus also on widening the social security net. How do we emphasize that? How do we increase that so that private sector jobs get created, entrepreneurship gets created, startups get created, and the workers there get support mechanism. I think this is a very important point. And the focus on care economy. I think that is also another new area where we need to work on, because it is internationally, it's going to be a very important thing on it. And we have certain things on the employability also, like there is a, we said that the skill gap between industry and academia today also continues to be phenomenal. I think so there is some need. How do we bridge that also? I think could anyone also of us throw a light on that also, that how do we need to bridge this gap and how budgets can address this kind of a thing? If anyone would like to take up that.
Allow me to do that.
Okay, please come in.
Thank you.
Definitely. Welcome, Ritu. Very good. Let's welcome
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. Whatever I could pick from Mr. Ajay, Shankar, and Virjesh ji, I think I couldn't agree with them more on much of the points. But I'm so glad, Virjesh ji, that you touched upon employability. As an organization, we've always believed that India does not have a jobs problem. We have a wage problem. Everybody who needs a job has a job in India, in the form of self-employment or self-exploitation, whatever you want to call it. It's just that I don't think people have the wage that they need or they aspire for. So I think that's why touching upon the point of employability is so pertinent. I'm sure all of you are aware of what the budget essentially focused on. So I'm not gonna run through that, but I think few things that stand out for me. I think the budget does not definitely, or the one that just recently got presented, does not lack intent for sure. I think we are making all the right noises. We are making all the sending out the right signals. So to that effect, I think the budget was encouraging. For example, the budget's focus on skilling and youth is apparent from the fact that it is trying to look at what are the ways and means by which future job roles and skilling can be encouraged in new age, skill sets, whether it's in AI, robotics, 3D printing, etc.
Excellent. I think we would like to cover this in the next session also. Because this is the most important area, I think, for the next session, the future of work and the kind of things.
Sure. So if you want me, I can wait actually for the future of work session. But
yeah.
My point is that skilling and how do we ensure that, we can't have good and better jobs just by saying so. I think the youth need to be readied and prepared to be worthy of those good and better jobs. The current challenge with India and our youth is that even if the jobs are getting created, or if it gets created, I don't think that our youth will be a match for those jobs. And hence, while there is a clear gap in strategy to execution in terms of what the budget intends and what actually gets done. And that synergy is something which is essential. It may not be the scope of a budget, but the public policy makers and industry and academia needs to think together, because what's happening today is that there are separate flights taking off from separate runways, while everyone's objective is the same, but that alignment is missing. So industry is doing something which is distinct and probably not aligned with what government is doing, and government is not aligned with what academia is doing. So everybody is approaching this problem as a vertical and not a horizontal. The problems of
Yeah,
job.
no, definitely. We will now take it up in the next session. That's what I feel. We'll complete this session. And in the next session, you are going to be an important speaker
Sure.
for us, panelists, in terms of taking it forward. So we would like to close this session and try to work on the next session, which is the future of work. So just to introduce the thing is that the economic growth, which happens across the world, never happens on an even basis. It is always uneven. In certain sectors, you have very fast growing sectors, and certain sectors become the sunset sectors. So you have both the sunrise sectors and sunset sectors. So we need to focus on what are the kind of sunrise sectors and what kind of jobs these sectors are creating. The technological developments have this potential to change and disrupt everything. All the entire paradigms change. So they need to accommodate that, because all that has to be taken as a part of our future strategy. Now, the growth also is accompanied with a changing relationship between capital and labor. I think that is where, again, also it is happening very differently as we see in the gig sectors or in other sectors. So we find that there is a lot of change which is happening in terms of these relationships, where we can discuss how it will help, or it will should be taken into account, while also creating social security mechanisms for this purpose, as Mr. Virjesh also said. Then we also have like digital economy, gig economy, care economy. We have discussed green economy. Now these are the rising paths, but then very different skill sets required. As you said, that yes, we need to work on these different skill sets. How do we make people employable to move at the desired pace? And very importantly is that globally also the developed countries, they are facing an aging problem, and global South has a you can say a demographic dividend, and it can work in terms of building up, filling up these gaps. So how do we take that also into account while looking at the future of work across different sectors, across the India and across the world, which is going to happen? So I would like to first introduce our first panelist, Ms. Janaki Srinivasan, Associate Professor with the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore, for guiding us and enlightening us in this future of work.
Thank you. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
please.
I'm going to enlighten and guide, but what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about some work that we've been doing over the last 4 years. I think the first session was really interesting. It gave us a macro, broad perspective. I'm sort of going to go a little bit in the other direction and say a little bit about what workers have to say about this, right? We've been looking a lot at job creation, which is, I think nobody would disagree that that's very, very crucial. But as someone in the first session also brought up, the quality of jobs is also critical. And what I'm going to speak a little bit about is the gig economy and regulation of the gig economy, or rather the lack of regulation of the gig economy. So I work as part of a team called a global network called Fair Work. And what we've been doing over the last 4 years is engaging with digital platforms that offer gig work opportunities, interviewing their workers, and also doing desk research to come up with what we call a Fair Work rating at the end of the year. Now, I just wanted to say a little bit about what we hope to do with the rating, because I think that has implications also for what I'm saying needs to be done. And that is that, like multiple people pointed out, I think this is no one entity's, it can't be just the state or just the platforms who can achieve anything to change the working conditions of these workers. I think all of you have been probably looking at newspaper articles and such, which have been talking about, I think Ritu brought up the issue of pay, but also appalling work conditions along a bunch of other dimensions as well. Now, is it only the platforms that's going to change this? Is that even possible? Is it only the state? No, I think everybody has a part. And what we are trying to do with the ratings is to talk to all the actors, but also then through the ratings to pressure regulators to regulate more and better, to nudge platforms to make some changes, and also get a better sense from workers themselves of what it is that they want changed. And of course, there's been a tremendous amount of collective action from workers, which is amazing, and I hope that continues. So what we do is we score platforms around 5 dimensions, and I think these are not controversial dimensions. This is something that's emerged through discussions with ILO, etc., and mirrors much of what is called decent work. But we look at pay, work conditions, contracts, management, and representation. And the idea is to see if how many of these, we focus largely on what we call location-dependent gig work. So your Uber and your Swiggy and things that require people to work on the ground on location. So I'm not looking at, say, an Amazon Mechanical Turk, or that's another kind of gig work, which is cloud work, right? You can work on it remotely. So we are looking at location-based ones. And what we've been finding, of course, is that the workers' concern is, of course, like we like to say that the 3 most important concerns are pay, pay, and pay, right? And I think what is interesting here is before we try to regulate or fix it, I think understanding it is the first important point. And of course, what we have to recognize is that the terms on which employment, which is in this case a controversial word, because as you all probably know, there's a PIL out on what the relationship between platforms and workers are. This is not, in fact, very often gig and platform work are defined by what they are not, which is they are not traditional employment-employee relationship. So given that everything from pay to conditions, right up to collective action becomes something that needs to be battled out anew, because legally we are in a gray zone, right? So pay, calculating pay, given that a lot of the costs in these cases are incurred by workers, which is fundamentally different than a lot of the other industries and sectors we have been talking about so far. That makes it really complicated to figure out what it is that a worker is finally making, and whether that hits minimum wage figures. Most of our scoring shows that almost none of the 12 companies we have been looking at are able to offer minimum wages after including costs. So the calculation of that becomes very complicated, and it's not very transparent how the end figure is arrived at. And 2, while some workers might be doing well, there are definitely lots of people who are getting left behind. And I'm just talking here about the statutory minimum wage. I'm not talking about very aspirational figures. Conditions also, we have seen lots of issues, contracts, workers don't understand what the contract says. The contract already clearly specifies that it's not an employer-employee relationship. Management has also been an issue because reaching out to the platform becomes very complicated. And representation has actually been a huge challenge because as you can imagine, these are individual workers in multiple places. While they have very creatively organized, and there has been much of that going on over the last 5 years, collectivization itself takes on a very different shape in this structure than earlier labor groups. So I thought I would just quote some of the things that workers said, which I think really gives us a better sense of what's happening. So much of the promise today, or even hype around the gig economy, has been this idea that it offers workers flexibility. Again, while this is definitely true for some, here's an Uber worker who basically told us, while we can turn it, he means the Uber app, on and off whenever we want, there will not be any benefit for us if we turn it off just like that, because this has to be running continuously. If we stop in the middle, it's over then and there. We have to work till the evening. We are trapped in it like this. It is just like going to an office. We cannot leave whenever we want. Many people have come into this expecting there is no one to control us, but in reality, there is control in the background. Another specific thing I wanted to bring up is issues around various kinds of opacities in the sector, right? And I'm saying this because I think these are things that definitely need to change in order to improve the quality of workers' lives. And I think eventually that is something we should really be focused on, not just whether they have job or earn any wage at all. And one of the critical things here, and this is sort of ironic, given that there's so much celebration of gig work and how it's going to grow, we don't actually seem to have any numbers on how many gig workers there are. There are all kinds of projections, but the NITI Aayog, for example, I think for 2019 to 20 said about 68 lakhs or 6.8 million. The ASSOCHAM estimate, the 2021 compilation, I think says something like 150 lakhs. The eShram portal, when it started to, when worker groups started to estimate gig worker counts based on that, it sort of stopped in between, so it's not complete, but they came to something like 7.2 lakhs or something. But my broader point here is, if we don't even know how many people we are talking about, how are we going to do anything about their work conditions, or even understand the sector enough to make all kinds of promises and proposals based on it? And again, the ironic thing here is there is very, very granular data on all of this available. But what even the Niti Aayog apparently didn't have access to is a way to get this from platforms. So why can't there be regulation around making it mandatory for workforce numbers as well as various associated operational parameters with that to be released? So that is one very important hole I think we have. In terms of opacity, there's also the aspect of data opacity that I wanted to bring up. Again, in a sector or whatever we want to call gig work, that is flush with data in that every minute action of workers and customers is recorded and available. Who gets access to seeing that data? Again, as a Ola driver beautifully told us, he says the platforms know everything about us. They have our Jataka, the horoscope itself, but we know nothing about them or what they're doing with all of this. So the contradiction here is there is a lot of data out there, but we don't actually know, workers at least don't know all that much about various things. Sometimes they can only see their own earnings for the past week, not for the month. These policies keep changing. They definitely don't know that much about workers as a collective and what the average earning, for example, is, average number of hours of working. So despite being awash in a sea of data, as it were, the people who need to know it in order to plan their very next day actually don't have access to it. So what can we do about this data, being companies being accountable for how they hold them, who they share it with, etc., but also importantly making it accessible to workers and to worker collectives so they can do something about it. And in a similar vein is the idea of algorithms, which I'm sure you've all heard about. And this is again something that is very important, especially in the gig work sector, given that many of the processes, including work allocation, are often done in an automated way. They can use algorithms, including in some cases, machine learning algorithms. And the point is that, as again a worker puts it, sometimes the app will keep pulling you to places you don't want to go. I try and go back to my area, but it will pull me right to the congested city center. So there is very little understanding, and this is not, of course, specific to gig workers. I think many of us who are customers of apps also face something similar. You don't always know why what is happening is happening. Now, that becomes especially a problem if it doesn't work out for you, right? If you don't get allocated work, if you don't exactly understand how you're being paid, how is it that you're going to approach the platform? Approaching the platform can itself be a huge issue. Sometimes the platform itself is also not able to explain exactly how they arrived at the conclusion that they did, whether it is in terms of whether you get allocated, what kind of work you get allocated, etc. So I think what I would, what I see as a crucial and important thing that needs to happen is regulating gig work, especially in terms of transparency in reporting workforce numbers, reasonable data protection practices and access for workers and worker groups to their data, and also algorithmic transparency and audits. One of the earlier speakers brought up the issue of the social security net, again, crucial. And this is something that did come up interestingly in the Rajasthan budget this time. In fact, there was a lot of reporting saying India's gig workers score a big win. I think the Rajasthan government, at least in the budget speech, has proposed that it has set aside 200 crores for a social security fund. And I know it's been working with various worker groups to enable social security and operationalize it. And I think, again, the point here is that we do have a code on social security. Gig workers actually are mentioned only in that one among the 4 labor codes, but it hasn't really been operationalized. So we have actually had instances where platforms have come to us and said, oh, now that the state is taking care of social security, that's not something we need to build any policy on. And in fact, they have even stepped back from some of their earlier initiatives around social security nets. So that is also, I think, a very, very urgent priority. So I wanted to, I think this is all I wanted to bring up, and maybe we can discuss this more in Q&A. Thank you.
Definitely, I think this is one important area which you have covered, because this is one of the fastest growing sectors. We don't have the clear numbers, and we also don't know exactly how the worker is faring, what is his average wage or what is the average number of working hours. And there is a need for regulatory mechanism, regulatory framework to be developed for it. There is a need for social security mechanism, which are really poor in this area because they are treated as associates, or they are treated as anything other than workers. They are not treated as workers. And so that is the bigger issue. I think it's a worldwide also this issue has been focusing on, and there is a need to learn from wherever other places also what is happening, how are they going to do, what kind of regulatory mechanism they are putting in. Maybe we can also learn from that. But yes, these are some of the important things, because we need to ultimately provide them a minimum wages also, which are not being provided, as you said, more clearly. So I think these are very, very important for us in terms of learning for these purposes, in order to build a lot of data availability around it. So yes, some of these important questions, I think we will need to look at it as we go forward. And I will also now request Ms. Gayathri Vasudevan, co-founder and CEO of LabourNet, to kindly give her views on this subject.
So I think I'll refrain from the gig work, particularly. I think
okay, that's it.
Janaki has been a far more illuminative of the working condition. But I want to spend some time on what we mean by skilling, and I think the relationship to employment. I think one of the things as a country we need to focus is on what kinds of employment are available for what cohorts of age groups. I think we are always thinking it's the youth which is the issue, whereas in my opinion, if there's a working age population between 18 to 60, each cohort, that is when they're 18 to 25, 25 to 35, 35 to 45, 45 to 60. I'm not even talking of, post-retirement work in a sense. If 80+%, and I'm not quibbling over whether it's 80 or 93 or 70, whatever the number is, it's significant enough for us to say, what do people do at each cohort? Because skilling and employment is directly related to that. In the pre-18 cohort, it's definitely school education in which vocationalization is important and critical for us. The national education policy has clearly called out, saying, please vocationalize education. In fact, for higher education, it goes one step further and says that by 2030, all our higher education needs to be in alignment with vocationalization of education. So which means that, if you have degree colleges, other than professional colleges, assumption is professional colleges are aligned to employability and vocationalization, and degree colleges are not. And I'm just using the words very colloquially, but I'm just calling it out. But which means that 2026 is the last year. That means every university, every college needs to fall into line of what vocationalization means. Now let's just move to school vocationalization of education, college vocationalization of education, and how employment looks at it, right? In schools, we have barely 14,000 to, and if we're a little more generous with just taking any number of, part-time courses also done in school, it won't cross 20,000. That means secondary schools which are offering vocational education are very few. And when they're offering vocational education, it's largely happening in the government school sector. Or it is happening in the, the foreign educated sectors, in the sense Cambridge and the IB. So which means the large majority, 85% of our schools are state board schools. So if 85% of our schools are state board schools, vocationalization of education really needs to be thought through. saying what is the career path for these young people who are going to go into, who aspire to go into higher education. What is it in higher education? And this is where I want to sort of bring in from what Janaki is saying and all the other speakers. Flexibilization and work seems to be a reality we'll have to live with for the next 30 years. That means that's the, that's the elephant in the room we have to acknowledge. And unfortunately, we'll have to, we can't be six blind men. So we just need to now peel it out, saying what skill sets will I get in school or in college, because of which I can actually ensure that every decade which goes by, if I have to change sector, if I have to change job, how do I actually access skills? Knowledge has become accessible today. And I say this with a little bit of caution, because given the internet penetration which has happened, I completely acknowledge that everywhere it's not the truth, but it is happening at a very rapid pace, which means knowledge can be attained anywhere, or you can access it. Maybe not attain it, but access it. But skills, what happens to skills? Skills is a little more, one has to practice it. I mean, if we were to talk just amongst the 5 people or 25 people in this room, would you want to go to an electrician who has attained everything online? I don't think we would be comfortable with that electrician, or the barber or the beautician. All of these are dexterity based. There is an experience element which is available, which means that there is a requirement for thinking how are we going to ensure our people, and I use this term again cautiously, saying youth, different cohorts of people at different age groups, how are they going to access skills, and where will they access these skills? Is this access of skills related to new technology? And this is another thing which I'm happy that there is a recent recognition in all policy documents, budget, the NEP, saying we need to look at future of skills. But technology has always transformed vocation much faster than the knowledge economy has. For example, if I look at just the decades of my life, we started with the Ambassador and the Premier car, which moved to Maruti, which means the engines were not accessible to auto service technicians suddenly. You couldn't pull it apart as you could with the Ambassador and the Premier and the standard models, right? Which means technology came faster into the auto industry. If you look at the vehicles now, EV vehicles will require a very different thought process. BS6, which is coming in as a regulation, will require a different thought process. And this I can take industry-wise, job role-wise, vocation, people who practice vocation are the ones who see technology change much faster than anybody else. So therefore, for them, skilling is imperative. It is not a luxury, it's not it's to survive, you need to skill. Same example I could take with carpentry, right? How many people today, most carpentry is practiced in manufacturing because it's on CNC. It is no more about a hammer and a nail, which will become a do-it-yourself tool. Therefore, it is important for us to recognize that our education system has to acknowledge that skilling needs to be at the forefront. And more than skilling, it's not about the immediate skilling, giving our people the access to say, where can you skill and how can you skill? That means we must almost be a career guide, right? Saying, listen, you can go here and you can get this skill set. It need not be long-term always. It could be short-term. The previous speaker had brought in the terminologies of recognition of prior learning and several things which are called out today. But these are always thought of as certification. To me, I've always been thinking to myself, this should not be certification. These are recognition, sure, of the knowledge that you have, but it is also to call out the gap that you have and therefore need to upskill very fast or reskill very fast. I mean, nobody takes an assessment just for the heck of it, right? You take it because you want to achieve something there. So, I mean, on the just the policy element, my take or my ask would be, you know, let's reimagine the way in which we're thinking skilling. That's important. On future of work, I think there are some very positive developments. You know, with the whole focus on saying we need to look at international skilling. How do people move outside? It's a remittance game to me. And if we say care is, you know, if country after country is aging and we have to send people to Israel or Japan or whatever, you know, Scandinavia, Europe, Australia, then it's a clear remittance. We need to be clear that those countries are going to want people above 25. They not want to want youth. That means our youth need to cut their teeth on care economy in India, get the experience, have a language, you know, have the ability to pick up a language, and then move to support the other countries with care. And that could be our biggest remittance driver, just like the Middle East was an important remittance driver for India for a long time. So that would be a skilled job, right? Physiotherapists, patient care, not nurses alone. There's a whole paraphernalia of job roles which will open up. And when you're sick, you want someone who talks your language more than anything else. You know, you do not want to speak in a foreign language. So for us, it's a foreign language. For them, it is ownership, and therefore we need to ability for us to skill there. On the data, I also have, see, in the data is always a complex field. We always make it out to be, you know, some absolutely insurmountable skill set that is required. A lot of data analytic work is actually very, very, very basic. And it is getting outsourced to several countries. The question really is, do we need these people to go out and therefore, quote unquote, bring remittance back to the economy? Or do we need to skill Indians to really service the global economy? To me, the second is a job creator. And particularly, I've been thinking, given women's you know, limitation, simply because as a country, we never thought what happens to unpaid work. The NSS census call it out, but you know, it's nice to say, listen, if you do animal husbandry, it's household, you know, it's an income and therefore it's good, but it's attributed. So how do you really change this? There's a lot of, there is let's say lot is pushing it, but there is significant number of women who are getting educated. And if we are able to link economic incentives, for example, if we can give VPN at home in remote locations, then SEZs, what is the relationship between SEZ and the woman at home? And therefore women come into workforce. All women are getting into today is low entry barrier work. So to me, data actually is a low entry barrier work, you know, just like tailoring or beauty is a low entry barrier work. How do we get them into low entry barrier work? By simply democratizing and using economic incentives for companies to do it. And as I said, a lot of the, I don't want to use the word AI, but a lot of the machine learning work is actually algorithm, which means it is repetitive work which can be taught fairly easily, and therefore work can be generated at scale. The third one that I would call out, and here I'll refer a little bit to Janaki's, is I've always thought to myself, you know, if these platforms exist in urban areas, why are they not servicing public infrastructure in urban or rural areas? Which means the state can adopt a platform thought process to service, you know, primary healthcare centers, primary schools, secondary schools, colleges, all government infrastructure lacks maintenance, which means that it's not Transparency Act which is the issue, but who services it. So in rural areas, 2.5 lakh villages by the Panchayat Raj department itself is uneconomical. If that is the number, if 2.5 lakh villages of our 6.5 lakh villages are not going to be economically viable units, this could be one where we could really generate employment by using the private sector mechanism, which has serviced consumers like us, while we may have done it unfairly and, to sort of paraphrase what you were saying, Janaki, pay, we may have really exploited, but can we have those platforms service the rural service sector, which means tremendous amount of job creation will happen. Repair and maintenance, construction, repair and maintenance need not be always new infrastructure creation. I want to again go back to a previous speaker who said if the budget looks at MSME and construction, and that's a place where jobs can be created. It's not always in the large sector. Any large employer is always highly automated, be it construction or manufacturing. It is going to be in the MSME where you're going to get jobs, which means service sector jobs of good regularity. I don't want to call it good quality, but regularity where access is given. Democratize these jobs could be a way. So I'll just conclude by saying three significant, to me, at least learnings that India as a country needs to take is vocationalization of education, which the NEP calls out. Put all our might, private sector, government, money, thought process to say how this is going to be. This is going to prepare your youth to be good adults, good middle-aged people, and later, maybe older middle-aged people, but access knowledge and skills regularly. Second, when we think jobs outside India and what India could service to, is we should think of it from saying, what remittance will I get? That means I'm not concerned with what is the, where is this, is it going to be the youth or is it going to be the next cohort which is there? So age important, but India should be focused to say, listen, let's get the remittance in. It's good for our country. It's good for our growth. Kerala grew on the back of remittance. Parts of Tamil Nadu grew back of remittance. Today, parts of UP are growing on the back of remittance. But let's get good remittance in. That means what job roles should I focus right from the time somebody is young to the time they're experienced. And then bring the people back. That means when people finish with that country doesn't want you anymore. What do we bring them in and how do we integrate them into our society? The third is not directly related to the future of work, but why not use the future platforms? The unicorns which we're celebrating, the gig economy, which is basically the blue-eyed boy in the room today. Bring it to our public infrastructure in rural areas to have far better infrastructure, first of all, so that, we actually have serviceable both jobs as well as better access to education, healthcare, etc., which is there. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for giving us this great ideas on it. That most importantly, it's the segment or the cohort now where we need to focus on each segment, not just the youth alone. And especially because there is going to be a skilling requirement at every stage of life. And when you are changing because of the technologies coming in, the work will change out altogether and you need to keep reskilling yourself. So this is a very important focus of yours, I think, which we need to take into account in terms of our thinking, not just at the school and college levels only, but at the later stage as well. Whether it is cars or carpentry, and everything is changing. So you have to reimagine skilling, and in the future of work, it's more importantly which you are focused on the remittances which is there. We have always focused on, okay, the youth only, but they need experienced people also. They need mainly experienced people. I think that's where we need to first develop them to a certain stage, and then only later on they can go for the remittance purposes. But then reintegrating back them into the society will be another issue which has never been focused on because nobody has yet been thinking, but something we will have to work on in terms of doing that also. And for women to get more into the working society, working sector, I think there is a need to bring them into low entry barrier work, or how we can get those things. Repetitive work also is there, which is so many of these analytical work and others are there, which can be open for women to take it into more into account. And using these platforms now, the new thing is, which you have said, is the unicorns, the startups, and all the platforms to be used to help in terms of bringing our public infrastructure back into place, or to bring in the rural development, to bring in education, rural education, to bring in health and all. I think that can also be a new idea which we should need to work on by getting in the private and public-private partnerships together onto it. So that's really wonderful. I now invite Rituparna Chakraborty, Executive Director from Team Lease, to give us the views, because she is the one who will be focusing on all the kind of employability, the skills requirement, how to match those skills requirement, and she wanted to also tell us on more in that session. I'm sure now you will have an opportunity to tell us all the things which we need to really do in terms of bringing about the skills and employability and matching the employees and all, which are your important areas of work. Please, Rituparna.
Thank you so much. As you've all got a preview of how much I have to say on topics like this. So, but keeping in mind the focus on today's conversations and the time, what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time initially in setting the context of what we are looking at when we're talking about India and its future. Then probably share a few very specific things. I mean, there are many solutions, honestly, about the subject, but I'm going to focus on few areas that I think we should really narrow down on, and probably then share some comments on some of the discussions that I've already heard and some of the recent government schemes and announcements. So I think India's burgeoning population offers us two major assets, namely a huge consumer market, which has the potential to grow 9 times its current size of about 18.5 trillion. So and a huge demographic dividend along with it. A huge potential market and a large working age, which is 15 to 64 population of nearly 1 billion over the next 25 years, actually augurs tremendous opportunity for the future of work, and especially if it's India that we're talking about. So as per ILO, the labor workforce participation in India stands at about 52% compared to 73% of US, 76% of China, and about 78% of UK. So even if India increases its labor workforce participation by 1% every year, it will create around 95 million non-agricultural jobs over the next 25 years to achieve a labor workforce participation of about 70%. India created about 1.3 million jobs between 1992 and 2019. Now, to maintain the same level of employment growth, its GDP needs to grow at an average of about 10.8% annually until 2030. 6.5% between 2031 and 2040, and 4.2% between 41 and 47 to support the creation of 231 million jobs. And these growth rates are required for India to achieve a goal of reaching $10 trillion economy by 2031 and $31 trillion economy by 2047. However, the country struggles with significant skill gaps. That's my pet peeve these days, with approximately only 5% of the workforce recognized as formally skilled. The future of work will require advanced technical skills and software transferable skills and a long list of other skills to be able to change that ratio. The World Economic Forum indicates that more than 52% of India's workforce needs reskilling. According to ILO, 60% of formal employment in India will be prone to automation and brings changes in skill demand, gender disparity in workforce, and reorganization. And believe it or not, this change and transformation is happening faster than we ever imagined. The concept of skill increasingly denote workforce adaptability to work in a fast-changing world of work, especially in enhancing the quality of jobs. We're talking about better jobs. In addition to pay and benefits, creating more quality jobs require attention to working conditions, workplace culture, job design, supportive work environment, skill development, and career advancement. And I think, thanks to the pandemic, I mean, there's much to curse about the pandemic, but thanks to pandemic, we have realized or unleashed the potential in terms of how work can look in future and what are the potential changes that are possible, which earlier we never thought were possible. Education and skills help economies achieve dynamic growth with quality jobs is a pressing priority throughout the globe. Therefore, the need of the hour is the creation of an adequate number of jobs. And I'm sure we all agree in this panel, and that's why we have this discussion, and especially to absorb the large number of laid off workforce here and there in pockets that we keep hearing about. Immediate measures can focus on utilizing public expenditure for promoting skill development. Skill development is an essential factor for achieving the objective of decent work, both by increasing the productivity and sustainability of the organization and for improving working conditions and the employability of workers. I'm sure we can all agree about that, but I think I'd like to surface one challenge. The word skilling is not a word that neither employers jump out of excitement around, neither do individuals. I mean, it is something everybody knows. It's like that bitter pill, everybody knows it's important, but it's not that everyone's today excited about. So we need to keep that in mind. The quality of jobs, what are the solutions? I think the quality of jobs can be enhanced in two ways. I mean, there are many ways, but I'm going to focus today on two. Upskilling and reskilling of a future-ready workforce. Now, there is a high demand for skilled personnel in field of new age tech skills. These skills are no longer confined to the tech sectors and have widespread usability across healthcare, banking, and retail. And at some point, we need to democratize tech skill set because, it's no more supposed to be for the elite field. I mean, we have to make it so easy that any of our kids, anyone coming out of any school and college, irrespective of their academic background, should be able to adopt it. The demand for upskilling is expected to further increase in 2023 as new technology concepts such as Web3, Metaverse take center stage, creating new job opportunities for developers, engineers globally. There is a significant gap of 51% in the current demand and supply of AI professionals. An estimated demand of AI professional will exceed 1 million. To be honest, I can rattle out the gaps, and it's not just in higher skill sets, whether it's in terms of just warehousing capability, whether it's in terms of frontline jobs in sales and logistics, the gap is becoming wider. The intent to upskill has already touched a record high with 79% professionals, including freshers, planning to upskill themselves as jobs in newer domains emerge. Now, bridging the skill shortage with apprenticeship. Apprenticeship or apprentices deliver essentially three outcomes: lower people supply chain costs, lower attrition, and higher productivity. Germany, Austria, and Switzerland are having low unemployment as they offer valuable policy lessons in apprenticeship education. And even today, by the way, when the entire Europe is under the grip of severe recession and inflationary situation. An expansion of vocational training through apprenticeship has extended multiple benefits. And, I think more importantly, I think one of the points that I've been trying to make earlier is that there is lack of synergy, like industry, academia, and the youth. One of the ways by which we can marry this together is actually the concept of degree apprenticeship, where essentially we're saying kids, rather than following a traditional path of schools and colleges, get into an apprenticeship program early, and simultaneously we can leverage technology to be able to enroll themselves, and thanks to NEP, it's possible today, into various industry-led degree programs to give them the much needed credibility. So now some of the stuff that the government has announced in the budget, I think there was a launch of PMKVY 4.0, which is again trying to promote new age courses. It's a great initiative, But again, my concern obviously is that execution at ground level, how much it is going to impact the people who do not have the elite access today. And there, of course, proposal of 30 Skill India International Development Centers across states. There is a digital platform that we are talking about. We're talking about digital libraries. There is enough and more for MSMEs. I think what we need to watch out for is the final execution and how much awareness is there for many of these schemes that the government is talking about. I think one of the problems India has is that there is huge information asymmetry when it comes to employees having access to the right kind of individuals or youth or talent, and vice versa. I think somewhere government has to step in to kind of create an infrastructure like UPI for talent per se, where we know exactly which youth is available with what kind of talent, and simultaneously which employer is looking for what kind of employment. I think finally data, I think it's a topic which all of us have been speaking about a lot. Yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Janaki, with what Gayathri said. I think some of policy making cannot be accurate if you're always going to be struggling with what is the accurate data. So I think at some level, the silos that the government has created between ministries and data accumulation has to be converged so that we are in a position to be able to predict honestly what's going on in organizations if we were to talk about the future of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rituparna, very much for giving us this strong perspective, especially on like we need to look at solutions, the demographic of India, the huge markets available, the working force available, large, but how are we going to use it? How are we going to make it as a demographic dividend? The low labor participation rates, I think this is one important. If we do it just a little bit more, I think there's a huge job potential which gets created. But then, as you are saying that the GDP needs to grow at such a high level in order to be able to create these kind of jobs, I think creates a very big issue in terms of everyone's mind, that how are we following the right path, or or is it that the GDP growth is going without creating that kind of an employment or anywhere? But then yes, there is something need that yes, you need to do it pretty high. The skill gap, which is of course, which you have been always on pointing out onto it. And the important point is that large number of people need reskilling. Almost 75% of workforce, which we are saying. So now this is something which is an eye opener for everyone, that we need to have a very high. And another important which we need to do is the quality of job. How do we create those kind of jobs, for which again education skilling, because the poorer unskilled you are, you are the more discriminated against. The more skilled you are, the more care is the employer takes about you. So which is why the best thing, as you have said, is the focus on skilling, but how public expenditure can go help us toward the skilling in terms of increasing productivity, and how to give access to everyone to skilling. I think this is where a lot of things from the public expenditure we need to do. Then of course in the apprenticeship program is a very, very good thing, which is there. I think there's a government's focus also on it. How do we implement it? How do we execute it? And I think there is a need. There was a revamp being considered. No, there is there on the apprentice scheme. If it can be made something really worthwhile and workable, then I think we can have a big breakthrough here in terms of getting in things and bridging that industry academia gap. I think this is very important. Ground level functioning on PMKVY, yes. I think how execution happens, I think this is there. But another important, which how do we handle that? And maybe it's anything more you can give us on information asymmetry is there, no, between talent required available. How can we bring down this? How can anywhere, maybe like UPI, which you were saying, what can be new thoughts on it? How do we, maybe we can ask everyone in the panel to understand how we can bring this about, because that will help all of us to get to know what skills are required and what skills I have available, what can be done by more, or whom the employers can access. I think this can become a very big thing of matching up the scheme. So can we, maybe I would invite all the panelists to tell us something on it, and how do we match the skills, so that as well as not only in India, but even internationally also there is a need, there's so much skills are there, what skills are required internationally, and how we are able to match them, how we can have mutual recognition of degrees, or do whether, the skilling has to be more clearer on what do you mean by skilling, what kind of level of skillings and all that, and clear degrees or certifications in that. Maybe I will invite the panel to speak up anything on it.
Let me go on it. I think there's efforts to it, in India, we've got the NSQF framework. So it's actually the mapping of your, national skill qualification framework fundamentally comprises of performance. This is the set of what they call national occupation standards. A set of national occupation standards adds up to a qualification pack. So it's about mapping the two. But having said that, every country will have its entry, and it's always been like that. I don't think any country would be open to not letting. Like, I'll give you a simple example. The delivery person here, whatever they call delivery partner or associate, this delivery partner is driving a bike here, but if he or she has to go to UAE, license is a different license. And those are different. It's not the skill so much, but it's a licensing to drive there, which is the issue, and which could cost. Similarly, it could be the bus conductor in Germany. It could be the welder. So one will have to, if one has to look at international benchmarking, it is skills as well as the regulatory environment which will allow you to work in a country. I think the skills mapping has happened with a significant number of countries over the last decade. But the regulatory one is something one has to traverse as individuals, and there is a support which is required. At the higher education level, I'm not well versed to say. I could say, at least on the skills, I do have a fair understanding of how that mapping can happen, because the NSQF framework is actually very beautiful. It's actually so intuitive. The ability to map is very high. It's actually in the delivery of it. Our understanding and delivery of it is where we are making, we complicate it a lot more than it needs to be. So if we do a mapping on the skill sets, it's possible, and I think the country is in that direction. Several countries do accept Indian NSQF qualifications. A lot of the UAE, Middle Eastern countries do. We ourselves are working in Bhutan, where there is a mapping which happens. So it's an accepted one. So in the developed countries, how do you map it is something that one has to look at.
I'll now request Mr. Vipul. I think he would like to say something on it.
Thank you, Sushil. I have a proposition. Ritu, I'm referring to your earlier, what you were saying in your earlier intervention, the earlier session. I think you are more than correct that ours is a wage problem. Now, there could be several reasons for that. Let me try to put down or place before you three reasons for that. Three possible reasons for that. One is, I'm talking myself as, let's say, an entrepreneur. One is that I know that the guy whom I have employed, he may have a certificate, but he doesn't have the requisite skills. So why should I pay him more? That is one possible reason. Second possible reason could be that just like that, if I get something done by paying 100 rupees, why should I pay 150 rupees? That's more of a mindset issue, maybe. Third possible reason could be that even if I want to pay more, I know that that guy is skillful, he's an asset to my workshop, but I don't have the wherewithal because of various other factors, low margins, etc., etc. So I'm unable to pay him more, even if I want to. And that brings me, if I look at all these things, I see there are two extremes. On one extreme, why should I pay more, even if I may afford to, just like that mindset issue. At the other extreme, there is another mindset issue, that I'll demand more, even if I may or may not know the demand that I'm placing before my Malik, if I may say so. is not backed by quote unquote evidence. I don't deserve that. But I don't know or I don't realize that, something like that. So that brings me to the point which Virjesh ji has made. We need to have, I mean, these are two extremes. We need to have a middle path, a possible third way. And what kind of wages may be low, fine. But what kind of other benefits that we can offer to our workers? And I think the private sector is not alone responsible for that. That is my point before Virjesh. We need to have the private sector, the bazaar, the government. Government has no business of doing business themselves. Their job is to facilitate. But government job is to facilitate an enabling environment, a better regulatory environment for social security, etc., better working conditions, etc. So, bazaar, sarkar, and a very important role of Samaj. So, Virjesh ji, and of course, Rituparna and others, my proposition before you, why don't we think about this as a model and test it at some place, or maybe a couple of places to have some comparative data. Chittorgarh had our rural development or whatever, human development center is located. We can consider that place, having a model in place, consider Chittorgarh as a prayogshala. Bangalore could be another one. I mean, we can have different kind of different kind of flavors in our data. So that is, I think, could be one concrete outcome of this webinar. That is the feeling which I'm getting. So I'm placing this proposition before all of you, particularly Ritu and Virjesh. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Vipul. But first, we would like to have Mr. Dilip Chinoy to come in, because he is actually an industry veteran and who would like to also contribute to our program. Please, Mr. Dilip Chinoy.
Okay, so
Yes.
thanks, thank you. And I've been listening into the conversation very interestingly. I'd like to make a couple of points. I think first, what Dr. Ajay Shankar said about when creation the jobs, right? And how we actually enlarge the pool of jobs in India is critical. His tourism example is very good. But in an earlier conversation when I was present and he was speaking, and I'm not speaking out of notes, Dr. Shankar, so if I misinterpreted you, please forgive me. Actually, what has happened is that in most of the tourist centers, we can't get good quality accommodation. And in those accommodation, we can't get because the land prices are high. So both for building hotels and for building workers' hostels, right? I'll come to workers' hostels a little later. We need a public-private partnership where the land is owned by the government and the private sector builds and runs the enterprise there with a revenue share with government. Similarly, in most areas where there are jobs, and the whole issue, the issue that Janaki and a lot of other people raised about the right wage. The right wage actually gets accentuated because if I earn 1,000 rupees, I actually spend 800 on accommodation and food, and I'm only left with another 200 rupees. I'm just saying in terms of a percentage, not absolute figures. Now, if you reduce the cost of accommodation and food, right, and the person has got enough money to send back home so that his family can also live because their cost of accommodation and food is also reduced, then what today is seen as an unfair wage suddenly becomes a very fair wage going forward. And we need to actually look at it to see how do we reduce the outflow of money. No one is focusing on that. Everybody is focusing on the inflow of money. And there are a lot of organizations in India who provide their workers with the dry rations and staying not necessarily big organizations, even, organizations like Nalli Sarees and, Swagat restaurants and all at that level, they do it and they're very low attrition, including, Gayathri had done some work earlier on the construction sector, showing those construction companies that provided their employees with good living conditions, good working conditions, good food, actually had no attrition and people wanted to join them, even though they were not permanent workers. So I think, low cost housing and this other aspect and, developing sectors is one aspect. The second thing is, Gayathri talked about the age cohort, right? And Ritu and others were all talking, and there is actually the matrix which you need to form is those in education, those out of education, and a job, and those in job. So there are only 3 cohorts in the country who are potential members of the workforce. First, those who are in education. Second, those who are working. And the third is those who are not in education and either working. And that level could have some people who have got work. There could be a subset of people who have work experience or education experience or whatever it is there. And for each of these 3 cohorts, sliced by age, you require a different strategy for skill development. Unfortunately, I like Ritu's point that, everybody is on parallel runways and taking off in, I'm paraphrasing, you're not exactly quoting what you said, but, pulling in different directions. So for each of these cohorts, we need a very specific thing. Also, if you look at India, this is the apprenticeship problem that we have. If you take Karnataka, 3 districts account for 80% of the jobs, right? Now, in the other districts of Karnataka, there's no sane way that, the number of populations that you have, right, where you can get apprenticeships going or whatever can be going there. So you need to rejig the system. You need to create apprenticeship experience centers in areas where there are no, no jobs there, or including if you take Delhi as a city, right? If you want to introduce skilling and all in Delhi as a city, then there are no opportunities for apprenticeship in many schools within 1 kilometer or 2 kilometer radius of the schools or colleges. So you've got to actually think it a bit out of the box. The next challenge, and I think Gayathri put that in the chat box, is this whole thing of how do we look at the international alignment and, how we actually do that. See, it's very simple. Actually, everyone is making the whole skill space very complicated. It's a very, very simple thing. There is a job. The job has a competency requirement. A job, you could be an entrepreneur, you could be a professor, you could be a teacher, you could be a researcher. Every job on the planet has a competency requirement because every job at some point of time has been advertised. Based on that competency requirement, you put it in a skills framework. Currently the government has moved it to 8 levels. Earlier it was 10 levels. Internationally, a hairdresser, what he or she does in India is the same thing as what is done in Taiwan, Netherlands, or whatever it is. So if you develop a competency framework and a job qualification standard, right? As way back as 2013 and 2014, 84 job standards in India were aligned with the UK and Australia. The only difference in the roles was need regulation, the regulation for some of the jobs of retail or, car mechanic or something were different in Australia and England, and you had to add on that layer there. So you can easily do it, and you got to micro credit your systems there so that if you are done a retail thing from India and you want to switch to Australia, you only add to the 3 or 4 other qualifications that you need. So you can actually switch from here. In fact, industry has been driving that, especially in the sectors like beauty, retail, and driving. For example, there's a very good example of India and UAE alignment in driving. So international harmonization can be done very, very quickly. The next, and really, I just want to make this is the final point that we're looking at. If we just ensure, right, and very simple to do, that any job, right, which is advertised, and now you have artificial intelligence and you can crawl and all. is advertised to actual job role that is put out by India. Typically, the Sector Skill Council used to do that. Now you have a lot of awarding bodies and the whole thing has got complicated. So if any job is actually advertised to that, right, then it's very simple. Anybody who's got that certification can apply. Okay, because in this age of, digital privacy and, all of that, a lot of things are going to be hit by whatever privacy laws and all that we have if we try to create a very extensive data network. And the final point I'd like to make is, work is 24/7, but skill training is not 24/7. There are 0 institutes. I don't know if some have opened. To my last knowledge, when I visited all, no skill development institute operates in the evening or at night. If you look at New South Wales Institute, they have, night courses, early morning courses, weekend courses, flexibility to learn and, go forward. So I think we need to relook at what it is being done in that aspect. So thank you very much for this time. If Gayathri would not have put that in the chat box, I would just listened and kept quiet. But thank you everybody for sharing what you did.
Thank you, Mr. Dilip, for sharing your views in the matter, and especially like training centers to come up and give it in the night and the evenings, also the apprenticeship programs to be revived and all. I would now request the panelists to keep up on the Mr. Vipul's suggestions that how we can take that also forward. Yes, please, Mr. Ajay Shankar, please.
Just a couple of thoughts. The way to look at, I think, one way of looking at this challenge is to look at it from the point of where there is market failure and how to reduce the space of that market failure. Because if we look at India the last 150 years, large organizations have been able to use young people, their ambition and their ability to learn very quickly to become world class. You go back 100 years plus. India Gate is a memorial to soldiers picked up from villages who became as good as German soldiers. Or in World War II, became as good as Japanese and German soldiers. We had a textile industry, which is a city like Kapoor had 90,000 workers who went into the textile mills and produced stuff which were sort of globally recognized brand names. So when we look at the skill issue, we should see where there is market failure. I have yet to come across a large firm, which has had difficulty in recruiting young people, training them and making them productive enough. Now, so the challenge is in the entire MSME space, where they are not large firms, they are unable to look after or invest in the right kind of skilling. So we need to look at where there is market failure and how to reduce. So if public money is to be spent, my view would be spend it first on the existing workforce so that they and their employers become competitive and efficient and can survive and grow in the global market. Then comes the issue of the younger people. There are two things, I think, which need to be seen with fresh eyes, given the way the world is changing so dramatically. So in our schools, I think we need to bring a lot more rigor on the basic 3 R's: the ability to comprehend, the ability to be comfortable with numbers and work with numbers. Every vegetable vendor in the old days of compound arithmetic was perfect. Ane, pi or chatak ka hisab, he never went wrong. And in the ability to write and communicate. And the fourth requirement, which has always been a weak because of our social hierarchies, the ability to use his hands efficiently. I mean, I was terribly embarrassed when I first lived overseas and I would see a relative just use his hands and do all kinds of things in the kitchen. And I just didn't know how to even assemble an IKEA furniture. So if we can get all this in the school system right, Then for the new economy as it is emerging and will keep changing very rapidly, I think we need a very nimble, flexible system of working with this basic talent that we have created at the age of 16, 18 to learn, relearn, skill, and also learn in the academic stream to reach to much higher levels. The best
that's fine. Perfectly.
Best example is Germany, where I have seen where at 14 people go into the vocational stream, at 18, 80% they are working, getting very high wages, and at that level they can subsequently keep educating themselves, and even some they pick up PhDs and reach top management levels. So that's very egalitarian.
I think we are running out of time.
So with that I will end. Thank you.
I will just request the other panelists also for any of their last views in this regard. Any last views, final views on this regard, on the whole subject, whether it is on the first part, second part, doesn't matter.
So I think it's been an extremely useful learning session. I think just listening to everybody's views on it. The key is for us to focus on the basics. The basic is to ensure everybody needs to understand where they can get knowledge and skills repeatedly and continuously, because that's going to be the future. Align our social security measures in a manner in which quote unquote white collar social security measures are available to everybody. How that will be accessed, I think we need to think through. In my opinion, there's no point now in going back and saying there's no flexibilization of work. It's going to happen. So it's better for us all to prepare for it and be one step ahead rather than, reactive there. The third is skilling is a continuous process, and we need to see our youths from saying, what are they going to do immediately after they turn adults? What are they going to do post-education? So this whole unemployment, how do we tackle it? Obviously, if we do not grow at the pace that is required, we're going to have a problem. Which means we need to think out of the box to see how do we create it, and it can't always be public expenditure. So what are the other ways we are able to create work? I'm not saying jobs, I think is what we would say. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I request Janaki to come in.
Yeah, I don't think I had that much to add. I think Gayathri summed it up very nicely. The only thing, and maybe this is me as an academic stepping in, I think the idea of skill also sounds very pat and well wrapped, right? It's not very clear what is low skilled, what is high skilled, and who gets to make those decisions. So I have observed that very often when we talk about, say, repetitive or tedious work, it is someone's definition. When you're actually looking at the people doing the work, there's absolutely no way you can say it's unskilled, and you can actually see it from the fact that over time, people get better at how many of these jobs they're able to do. So clearly there's a little bit of learning going on there. But now how much of that is tacit, how much of it can you codify into this sort of skilling ladder is not very clear to me. And again, my concern is I hope that doesn't become a reason for an undervaluing, right? Like even the data labeling example that you brought up, Gayathri, one thing I was thinking was, of course, we have a long history of feminization of labor, right? So who does the work also tells us how skilled or how valued it is. So how are we going to prevent that in the sort of mapping of skilling is something that deeply concerns me. But unfortunately, I have no quick recommendation or response to give to that, except to say that we do need to be aware that this idea of skill is obviously a much more complex thing than can be mapped onto a certificate or a skilling certificate of some kind. Yeah, but thank you, echoing everyone else on how this has been totally enjoyable. Unfortunately, I do have to drop off and run.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
But that brings us to the point of Mr. Vipul saying that the certification versus skilling. What is the certification available and what is the skilling required? Or whether the skill is available onto that. Any final views, Mr. Vipul, sir, on this? What you would like to say?
No, nothing is, Virjesh is there, Virjesh? Is he there?
I don't know. No.
Okay, nothing, nothing more. I'll talk to Virjesh separately on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a very important, because that difference and the gap and willingness to pay and ability to pay and all those things are going to be an important issue altogether. Yes, sir. Right. So thank you all very much. We had a good discussion. Thanks to all the panelists for giving us such wonderful ideas and more in-depth knowledge in tackling this subject and the way forward also. I'm sure we've been able to get some idea on how to move forward in the future, not only near term, but also in the longer term. How do we move forward? So thank you all very, very much. And thank you, Mr. Chennai, also for joining in and giving us your views in the matter also. Thank you.